Domestic violence. So important to know, everyone. Oh my god. I'm not about it. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This week I'm going to be talking about domestic violence. Now, it's something that I've kind of wanted to talk about for ages. I feel like it's so prevalent in our society, which it is. And so yeah, now is the time to do a video on it. So in this video, I'm primarily going to be talking about domestic violence perpetrated by men towards women. Yes, it happens to men too, but I'm going to be focusing on women today in this video. And one of the reasons why I'm doing that is because it primarily happens to women, and that's what I am knowledgeable about. I'm not knowledgeable about domestic violence towards men, so I'm not going to talk about it. So I'm going to talk about what exactly is domestic violence. There's a couple of different types, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some stats and some figures from across the world about the numbers of people who experience it, etc. We'll talk about some of the reasons why men carry out domestic violence against women, and then we'll talk about some of the reasons why it so often goes unnoticed and why it is so difficult to talk about sometimes, and why it keeps happening, basically. And then, which is super exciting, for the month of July, I've been doing a fundraiser for Women's Aid. And that's kind of why I'm making this video as well. I'm doing a fundraiser for Women's Aid. They are this Irish organisation that provides loads of services to deal with things like domestic violence, basically. So I'll be going through some of their services and talk about the fundraiser, that kind of thing, towards the end. So that's exciting. So let's get started. So obviously, first of all, just want to disclaimer, I'm not an expert at all. This is just what I know from being a feminist and learning about this stuff, and I even learned a lot more researching for this video. So just want to put that out there. I'm not an expert. I will link a load of websites down below that are experts and know way more than I do, that are really good resources for information on this and services and everything. So they will be linked down below, and then you can look at them. But they are who you should go to if you are actually in trouble and want serious help. So let's talk about the different types of domestic violence. So I think this is really good for people to know, because so often I feel like people are experiencing domestic violence and they don't know it's domestic violence. And so that is then one of the reasons why people don't talk about it, because they don't actually know that they're a victim of it or they're experiencing it. So let's go through some of the different types here. So one kind of overarching definition of it is domestic violence and coercive control is a persistent and deliberate pattern of behaviour by an abuser over a prolonged period of time designed to achieve obedience and create fear. So no, that's a lot. That's kind of like an overarching definition of what it actually is. Now, there are so many types. A lot of people think it's just physical abuse, like hitting, hurting like really physically badly with like a weapon or a knife or anything. People think it's just that, but it's absolutely not. But I mean, that's obviously horrific, but that's not the only type of domestic violence you can experience. And I think a lot of people think, oh well, you know, I'm not being, and obviously you don't want to admit yourself that you're experiencing this, so it's obviously understandable. But I think a lot of people will say, oh well, you know, he's not hitting me, so it's fine. And obviously that's not. So other types are emotional abuse, psychological abuse, you know, making you think things are your fault, gaslighting, you know, making you question your reality, you know, something happened and he's saying it didn't, and kind of that, like, just kind of making you go insane, basically. Sexual abuse, obviously rape, sexual assault, and again, even if you're married or it's your partner, consent. You need consent at all times, so it can be that, but you know, over and over. And again, I think it comes down to people thinking, oh well, you know, we're in a relationship again, so it's fine. No. Even if it's your partner or your husband or your wife or whatever, you need consent. So it can be that as well. It can be financial abuse, so things like, you know, if he's in charge of the money and not letting you spend what you need to, you know, looking over your credit card bills or whatever, or just not giving you money at all, like making you beg for it, that kind of thing. Then there's things like digital abuse, which I think is really interesting as well. So that could be things like, and again, these are not just the only things. It can be like so many things, and I encourage you to go googling and try and, you know, see what other kind of types of domestic violence are out there. But you know, things like digital abuse is, you know, if you're active on social media, like looking through all your messages. It could be, you know, sexual abuse imagery, you know, if he has, you know, nudes of you and sharing them around the place, or, you know, anything kind of involving the digital sphere, you know, not allowing you access to the internet, keeping it from you, those kind of things. So it's so wide ranging, and I think it's so important to know that. Then it can also be things like neglect. I feel like there's a lot of people who will say like, oh well, you know, just because your boyfriend doesn't pay attention to you, that doesn't mean it's domestic violence. Obviously not. You know, like, people aren't silly. This, you know, that could be things just not being a partner that you deserve, not caring for you, and that could be, you know, other kinds of partnerships as well. But you know, if you have a living parent or a living child, just neglect, and obviously, yeah, like children as well are involved in domestic violence. So that's really important to keep in mind as well. It's not just, obviously it's horrific when the partner is experiencing, but obviously children are involved as well. So it can be neglect of them in that relationship as well. So yeah, just good to keep in mind, I think. I think important to say as well is that the concept of coercive control is now illegal in Ireland. So people actually, well, I hope that like Gardaí and people are now becoming aware of domestic violence that isn't just physical, and they're becoming aware of the control aspect of domestic violence. And so now if something has happened after January 1st, 2019, and it can be deemed coercive control, that actually is illegal. So that's a really good development in this area. So now on to some stats and some facts and all that lovely stuff about the kind of prevalence of domestic violence in the world, because this is so prevalent. And like, because I'm young, and I think sometimes domestic violence can be seen as like kind of like an older person's issue, like you're like a married couple or something. So I feel like maybe people my age don't really like kind of get into this topic, but it is so prevalent. Like, you wouldn't believe, like shockingly prevalent. So these are some stats that I have here. In Ireland, on average, 1 woman a month is killed. 63% of women were killed in their own homes. So like, I think that's important to know, because we always think like, oh, well, the streets are dangerous, like women can't go home when it's dark. And it's like, women aren't actually safe in their own homes. And I think like we villainize the outside and the dark, but we don't talk enough about how dangerous it actually is to be in your own home. So I think that's really interesting. And then in resolved cases, so that's like cases where they actually say reported, which doesn't happen often enough, and where it was actually taken seriously and they actually like won a case or whatever. So that's in resolved cases, 55% were murdered by her partner or ex-partner. So that's another thing really interesting to talk about when it comes to even things like sexual violence as well. We often think that it's a big, bad, scary stranger. It's not. And it's called femicide. So people think like femicide is the killing of women. We often talk about homicide, but actually femicide is the term for this. And again, it's as scary and as dangerous to be in your own home than it is to be out in the street. So then another really interesting stat that I think is just, kills me, is internationally, approximately 2/3 of those murdered by intimate partners or ex-partners had been physically abused before they were killed. And so that, I think, is just so important, because you hear of so many cases where a woman reported domestic violence, so like a hitting or whatever, wasn't taken seriously. And then this happens literally all the time, over and over again. She then is murdered. And the papers and the press and the like authorities act like it's this big surprise. And it's like, but she reported to you several times, or even once. She reported this to you and you didn't take it seriously, and now she's dead. And that happens so often. So like, we need to, like, I'm sure there's some people out there who are just like, oh, well, you know, it's just hitting, it's just a little bit. These things escalate. And it can lead to being murdered. Like, literally, it's actually just, it's so serious. It's so outrageous that it's not being taken seriously. And so these things are in a pyramid again, you know, like the so-called small things at the bottom and then murder at the top. And that is often where it leads to. So then that is just, so important to know, everyone. So then finally, this kind of like this European-wide study was done in 2014 called Violence Against Women, an EU-wide survey. And it found that 14% of women in Ireland have experienced physical violence by a partner since age 15. 6% of women have experienced sexual violence by a current or former partner, which I think is outrageously low and probably not accurate at all. And then 31% of women have experienced psychological violence by a partner. And then 12% of Irish respondents in the survey had experienced stalking, and that includes cyber stalking as well. So again, it is just so prevalent. And I feel like those stats sometimes don't even kind of like go through to people's consciousness or something, but just know that this happens way more frequently than you would think. I want to talk a little bit about why this happens, why men do this to women. I think so often we just don't talk about that, and that is the crux of the issue. That is the reason. We talk about like how many women have experienced it, and we say it even in the passive voice, like have experienced it. But who is doing it to them? Like, why aren't we asking that question more? It makes me so angry. So I think a couple of reasons. It's just a lot of the time it's just men's entitlement. Men are literally raised to be entitled to a lot of things. And one of those things is women's bodies, women's attention, women's love and comfort. And they want to have that at all costs. And so they exert this power over women to try and keep them. And I think it's not just as simple as that. I think it's really interesting to note that a lot of men, and this is like a documented thing, a lot of men who are perpetrators talk about feeling powerless themselves. Like they might have grown up in a bad household or whatever, and they feel like they have no power themselves, so they actually need to exert that power over someone else to feel powerful. And I think what's so interesting about that is that like they know what it's like to feel powerless. So you'd think that they would be able to empathize with the person that they're now making feel powerless, i.e. the woman. But no, I think it's so interesting, and so to get that power back, they need to do that. They need to exert this over someone else. It's just so sad, honestly. A lot of them actually see themselves as victims, which is so interesting, and I think definitely needs to be talked about more. If we're actually going to solve it, we need to talk about that. I think that particularly is really interesting. There's also a bit of talk about like mate retention behaviors, which I didn't really know before. And it's like this kind of maybe like, I don't know, biological thing where you need to retain a mate, and you think that by controlling this person is the way to doing that, and very often it is, obviously, because a lot of women stay because they are so afraid of leaving, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it's obviously not healthy, and I think that concept is really interesting to know, and I do actually need to do more research into that myself. But I think that's interesting to think about. One last thing I wanted to mention is just the issue of alcohol and drugs. So a lot of the time, I think domestic violence is excused because we say, oh well, no, he's a drug addict or he's an alcoholic. And yes, like domestic violence is more prevalent in households where someone is an alcoholic or a drug addict, but that is not the cause of it. Like, yes, that exacerbates it, but it's not the cause of it. And so I want that to be mentioned, because I think as well it's an excuse we use. Like, oh well, sure, he can't help it, he's an alcoholic. No. And again, it's just another way for them to evade responsibility, I think. So again, alcohol, drugs do not cause domestic violence. They might pump it up a little bit, but the core desire to do that is already there, and the alcohol and drugs just exacerbate it. But that's not the sole reason why it occurs. So I wanted to mention that. It's very important. Now, next, I want to talk about, I guess, why so many women don't report, and why we don't think this is as big of an issue as it is, and why I guess I want to say the phrase why it continues to happen, but I don't want this to be blaming. I'm not these, like, the reason it occurs is because of men. Women are not the reason why this happens, but a lot of the time, unfortunately, we need people to report, we need people to tell their stories for something to stop happening. And so that's what I mean when I say why this continues to happen, which is very upsetting and annoying, but that's just kind of, I suppose, the way things are. And as well, like, it's so often said, oh well, I couldn't possibly, as well, with all women are gaslit, it couldn't possibly be domestic violence because you didn't report it. And it's like, oh my god. So I'm going to talk about some of the reasons here why a woman wouldn't report. A lot of times you're embarrassed. People think you might have the perfect relationship and you're embarrassed to kind of out it and say, well, no, I haven't. Or it could be going on for years and you're like, oh my god, okay, this has been happening for like 5 years. I can't just like all of a sudden tell people. That's really embarrassing. People will then know that I've been going through this for the last 5 years, and it's just horrific. And I think people can relate to that. Like, people kind of want to pretend that they have these perfect relationships, and again, that's as a result of society, just putting relationships at this pedestal, and putting it on women to have these perfect marriages and have these perfect households. And if you don't, then you somehow fail. So I think that's a really interesting thing to talk about, and that's a lot of reasons why you might not say anything. A lot of times, if something happens, you'll say, oh, well, it's just the one time. Obviously, like, you love your partner and you want to stay in the relationship. Like, you wouldn't be there otherwise. So you love this person. You want to believe that it's just this one time, because like you don't want it to happen again. So you want to believe in your core that it's just the one time. And unfortunately, it takes a couple of times or a lot of years or whatever of it continue happening for you to finally say, okay, maybe this actually isn't going to stop. And to even get to that point is so hard. So I think it's so ridiculous when we say to women, oh, why didn't you report? Like, it is so hard to even get to that stage where you would want to do that to the partner that you love. You think you can change them. You think, okay, no, I'll stay. They need me. They're obviously having a tough time. I'll try to change them. And again, it can just take so long of that before you admit yourself that it's not working. A lot of the time you don't, again, as I mentioned earlier, you don't know that it's domestic violence. You either, aren't educated on what it is, which so many women aren't, because it's continuously evolving, thank God, and we're stating, okay, this is what it is, and people have yet to learn that. A lot of people still just think it's physical, so a lot of times you don't even know that it's domestic violence, so how are you meant to report something that you don't know that it is? So that's really, really, and that's why awareness, like this video, is so important. You think it's your fault, and a lot of the time that's part of their MO. They make it seem like it's your fault, like you dropped something on the floor, therefore I hit you, so it's your fault. So again, if something's your fault, you're not going to report someone who you don't think is at fault because you think it's your fault. So again, that's it's so important to kind of think of these kind of nuances and how people's minds work in this instance. Again, you love them. They could be the father of your kids. You have this marriage, you have property together. Like, you are not going to want to break that up. You're not going to want to see your children's father in jail or not being able to see them. These are just horrific things. And I'm not for one second pretending like I've ever had to do with any of this stuff, thank God. But those are horrific things to have to deal with. Like, you're not going to want to do that unless you absolutely have to. Another reason is, like, you know, a lot of times with domestic violence cases, they isolate you from your friends. They might cut you off on social media. Like, they say you can't go out and meet your friends, you can't go out and meet your family because they want you all to themselves and they don't want the possibility of you telling your friends or family what's going on. So oftentimes you can't leave because you literally have nowhere to go. Like, and that's just so, and that's what we need, like refuges and stuff like that. But like sometimes you literally, it's like people are like, oh, why didn't you leave? It's like, but where would I go? And I think that's another level of privilege as well. We don't really think about that. We think like, because say for me, I could be like, oh, well, I have this person I could go to, that person I could go to. But a lot of times people don't have anywhere to go. And that is so, so important to remember. They also might not have any money. They might, you know, be a stay-at-home mom or whatever and don't have money. Like, how are you meant to leave when you have no money? Like, these are things that you have to take into account. And when people ask, why didn't she leave? Oh my God, like just mind blowing. And then obviously, I mean, it is so, so hard to leave when you think that the person you are leaving might murder you or might retaliate or might punish you, which often happens. Like, so often people will get to that stage that might take years to get to, pluck up the courage to leave, and then they are killed. Why would you, like, it takes so much bravery to risk that, and that's a real possibility. So again, just so many reasons why someone would not report or leave. And also, I just want to put in here that it's absolutely never your fault. If someone is beating you or controlling you or abusing you, that is never, ever, ever, ever your fault. And I really want to just drive that home. And I think when I was thinking about this video, you know, I thought about, you know, so often, and I think it's kind of an old way of thinking, but we often talk about relationships and things that happen in relationships, and we say like, oh, well, that's a private matter now between you two, or when people are kind of like spilling things online, we say like, oh God, they're sharing too much. And I think that is kind of an interesting thing to think about in this respect. Like we often think, oh, well, that's between you two now. And that can be anything, like, you know, finances or having like trying to conceive a baby or all these things we think you have to keep private. And I think that notion, that mentality does not help when it comes to a situation like this, where someone's like beating you or controlling you. You think like, oh, well, this is between us now and I can't embarrass him now, or I tell people our secrets now. And I think that's, and like, obviously there are certain things between a couple that you do just keep it to yourselves just because you're in love and it's between you and you want to, you know, kind of keep it to yourselves. But a lot of the times things like that should not be kept to yourself. Like your husband like beating you or your partner beating you or whatever should not be kept between yourself. So I want to kind of mention that as well. And I think I'm kind of just not about that old-fashioned mentality of like, oh, that's between you two now. I'm not about it. So then finally, I wanted to talk about Women's Aid. So Women's Aid, there's so many great organisations in Ireland that are doing great work, but Women's Aid is one of them. And for the month of July, the target was actually you walk 80 kilometres in July. And because I walk every day and I love walking, I actually hit the target on like the 11th, or no, the 9th or the 11th, I think. This is actually my little score sheet. How exciting. So you put in all the things you've done. I'm now on 165.9 kilometres, which I'm very proud of it. And I'll link the fundraiser down below. If you can donate, that would be wonderful. And it all goes towards the services that I'm about to talk about now. So I have a list here. They do loads of stuff. So Women's Aid, they have a helpline that you can ring. Again, I'll put the number and stuff down below. And particularly domestic violence has skyrocketed during Corona because of lockdown and people being locked down with their abusers. And oh my God, it's just actually horrific. So they offer a helpline 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Brilliant. They also offer an instant messaging service. So if you like can't talk on the phone without someone hearing you, they have an instant messaging service. They also have a text service for deaf or hard of hearing women. So that's really, really cute. You can just text them and like have a chat or see what the story is. Amazing. Now, a lot of the stuff has stopped because of Corona. A lot of the in-person stuff, I'm actually not sure if they've opened back up yet. I don't think they have just yet. So there is a drop-in service. I'm actually not sure, is it just in Dublin or is it all over the world? But you can actually drop in and have a chat there in person. There's also what I think is fascinating is, which I didn't really know about, is court accompaniment, which is like if you have gotten to stage again where you're like, you know, reporting and you're bringing someone to court or whatever, they can actually just go with you for kind of just, I suppose, emotional support and information, and to make sure that you know all your rights and know everything, and they're skilled in this and they're experts in this, and so that's fascinating. Again, that has stopped because of Corona, but again, just really important to keep in mind for future that like you will not be alone. Like you can avail of these services if you need to go to court. On their website, there's info on refuges, like places that you can go if you decide to leave and you've nowhere to go. You can go to these places. Again, limited because of Corona. but hopefully will be better soon. And if we keep up the funding, and if people like you fund or donate to my fundraiser, they can provide services like this. There's also a really cool service for people who English isn't their first language. They have a telephone line, and it's the same number as below, and they have a service where you can talk to someone in 170 languages. So that's absolutely amazing for any like migrant women who are particularly vulnerable in a country where you don't speak the language, so you're already vulnerable, and then someone might be abusing you. So it's honestly just horrific. What I think is also fascinating, and I wanted to mention in this video, and I'll put a link to it down below, is on the Women's Aid website, they have a whole section on how to cover your tracks online. And I think that's so important to talk about, because oftentimes you might be, if you're, you could be Googling stuff, and then if your partner is controlling you, they look at your cookies, they look at your browsing history, and they obviously then know what you're searching. So I think that's just really, really important to remember. So I'll link it down below. It's just a way to kind of, if you are searching stuff, to just hide your tracks basically. There's another organisation as well called Safe Ireland, which are brilliant as well, and again I'll link them down below. But what I've done, something I noticed on their website, and I'll pop in a little kind of view of it now, is on every page they have a kind of a quick button that you click that brings you back to Google. So if you're like in a room with someone searching or whatever, and your abuser comes into the room, you can just click this button and it brings you back to Google straight away, and it looks as if you weren't on the website at all. So then I saw that earlier on, and I just thought that was just so sad that that's even a reality. And for a second I kind of was like, wait, why would they need that? And then it hit me, and I was just like, oh my god. So yeah, that is just also horrific, but good to know if you are on those websites. So that is this week's video. It's a long one. There's a lot of information in there, and really I've only scratched the surface, but I hope you found it useful. Please, please, please would love if you donate to my fundraiser. All the money goes towards basically that, what I've talked about, helping women in this situation, providing those services. And yeah, and I'm getting the steps and I'm walking, so hopefully you can donate in some way, shape or form. Would love if you subscribe to my channel while you're here, give the video a thumbs up, or leave a comment with any info or any other kind of resources that people might find useful. And I will see you all in the next week's video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!